yeah, take all the time you need. But this is not there to make you anxious. This is not there to make you feel bad about yourself. This is there as a way of helping you just take an honest look. It's like a look in the mirror. And the reason why you look in the mirror is to fix it, right? Most people in here probably don't realize, but bed beard is a thing, right? We all know about bed head, but bed beard is a thing too. And if you wake up in the morning and don't look in the mirror, and then you got the bed beard walking around the rest of the world, and that's not a good thing. So the reason why you look in the mirror is so you can get up and fix it. Okay? James says that it's not, you don't want to look in the mirror and then forget what you look like. He's saying the law is like a mirror, and it teaches us who we are so that we can work to be better. So the quiz is like that. So as you take the quiz, know that this is just an honest look. It's not an all-encompassing, comprehensive assessment of your emotional health and life, and your salvation does not depend on it. We're not going to arrange you by how well you did, or this is not something to cause you test anxiety or a social experiment on our part. This is just a way to help you think about boundaries in a different way than maybe you have otherwise. I also want to point you to YouVersion. It's one of the apps you can get on your Bible. I use the icon on your phone looks like that little brown Bible. So if you're like, I have a Bible on my phone, but I don't know which one it is, you can get on YouVersion if you have that app. And there's actually a reading plan called Boundaries 101. And that has different devotions, different readings from Scripture, and then a devotion written related to that reading that you can use as a way to help you pray through and think through what the Scripture says about devotions. So that's just another tool that you can use. And so as we gather tonight, what we're going to talk about is the boundaries that you set with people outside of your family. Right? We've talked a lot about your own boundaries. We've talked a lot about the boundaries that you set for your kids and how much your kids need boundaries and how that you do that well. We're also going to talk about what you've learned over the last few weeks, and we're going to talk about people on the periphery a little bit. So Amanda's going to get up and has some questions for you.
Yeah. So we really want to start out by giving you all a chance to kind of process what we've been talking about the last few weeks. And so we know we just put you through a quiz, but up on the screen we've got some questions for you. And what we really want you guys to do is we're going to give you a few minutes to kind of just find a few folks around you and kind of look at some of these questions, answer the ones together in a group, the ones that come easiest for you, the ones that you have any thoughts right off the bat, and we're going to give you guys a few minutes to discuss, and we know you'll warm up here in a few seconds, so we're not going to be afraid of your quietness, so just know that going in, you can't scare us. Anyway, yeah, go ahead, find a couple or a few people around you, and go ahead and talk through some of those questions there on the screen. Have you thought about your own boundaries differently? Have you determined anything you can do differently or need to do differently? Have you tried to do anything differently? Have you made any adjustments? And what happened? How did that go? Have you made any specific adjustments with your children? And have you gotten more intentional in setting boundaries with your kiddos? And how did that go? And then what are you finding to be the most difficult? I put some examples there of things that we hear about, but maybe you're having a little bit different challenges. And so we're going to, like I said, let you talk about them a few minutes, and then we're going to give you a chance to share some of your insights with the group too. So go ahead. Can we get a little music, Jim? Thank you. All right, everybody. I hate to totally derail your conversations, but I went in on them too. All right. What did you guys talk about? What came up? Either between these questions, or even something that was in the quiz. What came up?
We're talking about cutting back on screen time
Okay.
at different ages.
Uh-huh.
For me, it's a 3-year-old, and just have to take it away, and that's all. That's how it is.
Right. Yeah.
Sort of ration for older kids.
Say that last part again.
You can sort of ration the screen time for older kids.
Right.
Just take it away and just tell them that's how it is. You can explain that you have a reasonable amount, but they need to do other things.
Yeah. So the question was about screen time, and I'll repeat it a little bit for the camera so that it can be heard. But just talking about little ones, 3 years old, rationing that time, just being willing to take it away and tolerate the impending fit that probably happens, but probably also doesn't last forever, right? Who else?
It feels like it.
It feels like it. I know. I know. Who else talked about screens? A few? Yeah, we were having a conversation in our pastor's meeting yesterday about how we are, as parents, we're really the first generation of parents that's going to have to teach our children how to have a face-to-face conversation. We're the first generation of parents that's going to have to teach our children to put that thing down because they're fine without it. We didn't have to be taught that. And so we didn't internalize how to do that from the way we were taught to do that. So we have to navigate this really as the first group of people who ever have really had to do this. And if you have kiddos who are toddlers, you know how important it is to teach them that they're okay without that thing, for really, that it really should be a reward, especially for toddlers. It should really be a reward. It should be a special occasion. It shouldn't necessarily be every time you go out to eat. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that, Ben, with littles?
No, one of the things I realize, my kids are kind of the same age, and they're so habitual, and they'll gravitate to something, and they'll latch onto something, and that's that age when they want to watch, the same thing over and over and over and over. And my son he's 1, and he wants the VBS songs on the video. So he'll dance along with the VBS songs, which is great. He's being active, and but at some point you're like, is this a little too much? And one of the things with screen time I realize is I have to start with me. Like, how much am I on my screen and with my kids there? What am I modeling for them? That's a really important thing, too, for me to keep in mind. And something my wife holds me accountable to, because I'm on my screen too much with my kids. And so setting that boundary for myself is a good place to start.
Yeah.
There's an app called Quality Time, and it is free, and it tells you how much time you spend in each app, how much time you are on the phone versus texting versus Facebook versus whatever. And it was eye-opening for myself.
Yeah.
So it's an app called Quality Time that helps you be more aware of what you spend on each app.
And it keeps track for each day.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, you can see, it's scary, but it's eye-opening.
Yeah.
I heard the new iPhone update will do that as well. We'll tell
Yeah,
you
it does.
all of those different types of things. They were talking on the radio yesterday about how many times, I'm not totally sure that I get it, but how many times people were picking up their phone, and it'll tell you that for the day. And the people on the radio had like 99. The other one had 118. The other one was 121. So I don't know if that includes just like picking up and putting it in your pocket or what all that includes, but if you think about somehow that phone was getting messed with about 100 times a day, yowza.
Yeah.
Yowza. But it'd probably be 500.
Yeah, you do it with them, and then they want to see yours.
Oh,
Have some really serious conversations about
yeah,
both of our habits and
yeah.
how can we have a happy medium.
Not only are we the first generation of parents who will have to teach our kids how to have boundaries with our phone, we're the first generation of adults that has to learn how to have boundaries with those screens. We've never had to do that before, so it's a whole new world. Yeah, Teresa?
One thing that I've noticed with our
whenever we give them the option, like, let's do something as a family, like play a game or something together, they're just off immediately.
Yeah,
They
Teresa.
always pick that.
Yep.
It surprises me still, but whenever we're intentional about saying that, they always will pick that over.
Yeah.
And they don't complain.
That's
So
cool.
It is, kind of goes back to, our habits as well, I guess.
For sure. The comment was just with a 13 and a 9-year-old, whenever it's offered, hey, let's put down our phones, let's turn off the TV, let's turn off Netflix, close our laptop, and play a game or spend some time together, that there's really no complaining or no upset feelings with that. Yeah, buddy?
Like you can play the games on your app in real life.
True, absolutely. We've got real life leading here that we can play the games in real life. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So what else? What else from the questions did you talk about?
I mentioned something one of you said, and I don't know exactly what it was, but you said something about know your non-negotiables and know your boundaries before you go into a conversation. I've tried to be mindful of that with my middle schooler. Because sometimes I think I go into a conversation expecting them to just be compliant,
Yeah.
and then everything becomes a non-negotiable.
Right.
I step back after the conversation, I'm thinking, I don't really think it was that big of a deal. I don't know why I made it a boundary when it really isn't a boundary for me. So I've just been trying to be more mindful of what exactly is
Yeah.
the boundary before we have the conversation, so I don't just kind of
Start saying
throw
no.
things at him like, well, that's not good enough, or that's not good enough.
Sure.
That sounds like something
Yeah.
we'd say.
Yeah. Yeah. The comment was to know your non-negotiables before you head in so that you're
Yeah.
not just saying no reactively, but you know what the bottom line is.
And I do that too, where I'll say, well, I'm putting my foot down, and I'm like, why? Why am I putting my foot
Right
down?
here.
Like, it just becomes a control thing. Like the toddler, I'm in charge. I'm the adult here, not you. And, well, why am I acting like a toddler? So that's something that's important that I was going to highlight again tonight is know what your values are and what your boundaries are before you get into that into the battle, so to speak.
Yeah. What else? Yeah.
I decided that I had my annual review at work today, so I decided to
Oh.
have my boundaries.
Okay.
Good for you.
I'm glad you're here.
I wasn't fired, so.
Woohoo!
We were talking about just different added responsibilities with working with students and things like that, and I told my boss that I'm willing to help out, but I'm not willing to help out to the point if it's going to affect any additional time I have to take away from my family or my responsibilities at home. I'm willing to help within the parameters that you allow me to help without having to overextend myself in a situation where I'm going to be affecting my own personal life.
Yeah.
And I was really matter of fact about it, and she's like, okay, I think it was a non-negotiable point that I've got responsibilities at home and I'm not willing to, work for,
Yeah.
and not go with those that I need to.
Good job out of you.
Yeah, that's a really
Yeah.
great example of good boundaries. Putting your foot down and saying, here's the things that really matter for me with my work. And the more you model that for your kids, the better off they're going to be. And when you talk about saying it matter-of-factly, that's when you know you're making a values-based decision rather than emotionally based decision. It's not about you being angry at your boss. It's just about saying, look, here's the resources I have. I can do this or I can do that, but I can't do both. Which one would you prefer I do? It's just, you make it mathematical almost.
Yeah. Good job. Anybody else want to share anything that kind of came up? Yeah. Oh, and then I'll do.
Okay, so I'm hesitating because I do not want to take this political, but I have a friend who has a 14 and a 17-year-old boys, and the whole Me Too movement and boundaries, and it's totally, I think, a totally different level than where we ever grew up, and he's trying to coach them as young men, right? What does that mean? And, what we might have thought was innocent in this world of social media and everything isn't either. So we're trying, you said we're the first parents to deal with screen time. I think on that edge too, as all of our kids get up to the age of dating and whatever, I think we're dealing with that too. Of
Yeah.
what could happen.
Absolutely. And I think that's why a couple of things that Ben and I know have both talked about is honoring when you're horsing around with your kids and they say no. Even if they're laughing, we stop. That's a challenging thing to do, I think, because you guys know it turns on a hot dime. 1 minute everybody's having a great time, and the next minute it's a disaster. So you're like 7.7 seconds ago we were having a lot of fun, and now we're not. Okay, super. We talked about that. We talked about how when our children tell us no, or when they explain themselves, that we listen with empathy and we let them know that their voice matters. All of those different types of things that we are really needing to be intentional to do with our kids, to listen to them with our boundaries in place. It doesn't mean that we go into a 17-minute explanation of why this or why that necessarily, but to honor their expressions, whatever they may be, to treat them as valid. And then if we still have to override it, then we have to override it. But I think that single-handedly is one of the most important things that we can do to help our kids learn boundaries, and that all translate into sexual boundaries and dating relationships and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Jeremy.
We had a conversation at the end of last
Mm-hmm.
week about, when I have to tell my 9-year-old from time to time, or frequently, time to do X, and it's not yet, or whatever, you made the suggestion. We'll say, if I have to ask you again, then you're going to lose X. So I used that a couple times, and it worked perfectly. So
Awesome.
Good job out of you.
Good. Well, good job out of you, because you had to think, you had to realize, okay, this is what I've been doing. Please don't do that. Please don't do that. Stop it, right? And then you have to stop yourself between please don't do that and losing your mind. So good job out of you.
It's never happened.
No, I mean, hypothetically. Not you, maybe. Anything else before we move on? All right. Well, you guys will have a chance to ask questions here in a minute, a little bit as well. Anger. So one of the things we really need to talk about when it comes to boundaries is anger. Anger, just like every other emotion, tells us something about what's going on in our environment. None of the emotions that we have are bad, whether it's anger, whether it's sadness, embarrassment, frustration, none of that. None of those are bad emotions. Okay, it's hard to take myself seriously when I look up there and see that. But if we don't deal with our emotions, whatever they are, they will deal with us. Hands down, no question. And for many of us, a lot of times anger shows up when we haven't learned how to deal with sadness, fear, embarrassment, frustration, all those different types of things. Anger plays out like all of those different emotions when we don't figure out what we're actually feeling. Where on the other hand, when it comes to healthy boundaries, when anger pops up, but you've done some of the work to set up healthy boundaries, what anger can mean in that situation is that somebody's jumping all over your boundary, right? Somebody has come into your house, to use the analogy that I used the first week, someone has come into your space and they're dumping their stinky food garbage all over your floor. And so justifiably, you're angry about that. This morning, I went to the bathroom to get ready, and this is just a snapshot. There was a Dunkin' Donuts cup sitting on the counter. There's 3 young women, 1 old woman, who get ready in my home every morning. And so I'm the old woman. So you're like, what? Okay. There was a Dunkin' Donuts cup, iced coffee cup, that had been there for minimum 2 days. Someone had decided to trim their hair, so there's hair all over the counter. And then I've got another one that uses a plastic baggie to put her phone in, and then I think she takes her phone into the shower. I'm not totally sure. Talk about screen boundaries. She's listening to music is what I understand. Oh, we're going with it, okay? And so then there's like 4 plastic baggies, and they're all over the floor, and I'm like, I teach a boundaries class. What in the actual heck is going on in my bathroom? So like any mature adult, I opened Snapchat, and I Snapchatted the whole thing, just took a video of it, and then I typed WTH and sent it to all of them. And one by one, they kind of came in and took care of their stuff, right? But I'm like, you guys are stepping all over my boundaries here. I just want to come into the bathroom and get ready, and I've got nasty iced coffee cups, and I've got hair all over the sink, and then there's plastic bags literally everywhere. So in a healthy way, anger tells you that your boundaries are getting trounced on all over the place. So in that way, it's good. When Jesus went into the temple and overturned everything, Jesus' anger came from the fact that people were violating God's holy place. And so that was a healthy, appropriate anger. But what you can do and what you can practice doing is really getting in this space where when you feel that thing in the pit of your stomach or you feel that tightness in your chest, we actually don't have to have an emotional reaction to every emotion. You, being a grown-up, are able to take that out and say to yourself, apparently, I am feeling very angry right now. What is actually going on here? And it could be stuff that's happening at work and can be stuff that's happening in your marriage, but you don't have to respond with an emotion that matches the emotion that you're feeling. You can take it out and look at it, and you can figure out what's going on, and you can decide from there, is somebody trouncing on my boundaries? Am I actually afraid? Am I fearful of something? Is that what's actually happening here? Do you feel powerless? That's a big one that comes out for feeling powerless, for feeling like people are making decisions that are affecting us and we don't have a voice in that. That's a boundary issue. But sometimes there are people who get to come into our lives and they say things and do things, and then we have to figure out how to deal with it. So if you have healthy boundaries, you don't need to be afraid of your emotions because you can know that you don't have to respond emotionally to every single emotion that you're having. Some of us will say, I'm doing fine. I'm fine. I'm doing so fine with anger. But just kind of take an inventory. Being quiet, the cold shoulder or the silent treatment, using sarcasm in a way that's not funny. That's actually possible, right? Kind of being passive aggressive. Those are all really clear signals that you're pretending that you're not angry, but you're super angry. And you need to take that out and take a look at it. And then the other thing that happens when we start to put boundaries into place, the worse off we be, the more sloppy our boundaries have been. When we start to put them into place, you might find all of a sudden that there's all this anger that's kind of coming up. And what that really is the years of the boundaries that haven't been in place and the years of the times that you have felt taken advantage of, all of the ways that you've gone above and beyond and weren't recognized, all that different kind of stuff can start to come up when you start to put healthy boundaries in place. So a couple of things you want to do with that. You have to deal with that. You have to deal with that or it will deal with you. If it's really a lot, for crying out loud, pay for a couple sessions with a counselor and just spew it all out. Never underestimate the importance of just getting it out, of just saying it. I don't know how many times Ben and I have had care conversations with people, and maybe we say 5 words in an hour. And they're done, and they're like, you have helped me so much. Thank you. And you're like, I'm glad this was free because I would have felt bad taking your money, because you did all the talking, and lo and behold, you feel so much better. Call a friend for coffee. Maybe warn them first. Like, I got some stuff, friend, okay? So different things like that. There's so many. You have to talk it out, journal it out, find somebody that you can process through that stuff with. It will deal with you if you don't deal with it. I want you to think about it like, say you've eaten something and you're about to get food poisoning. And we've all had that experience. It is ugly. And there's also not a single thing you can do about it. Your body says, nope, we are cleaning everything out, head to tail, we're getting empty. And you don't get to have a say in that at all, because your body is saying this stuff is in your system and it could kill you if we don't get rid of it. So we're going to get rid of it, and you don't get to choose. Think of your anger and the stuff that you're dealing with in the exact same way. The only problem is you can talk yourself into stuffing it. Either way, it's going to suck your life. Okay, so you have to deal with all of those things, or your boundaries it'll be terrible. Deal with your stuff, or it's going to deal with you. We've talked about in terms of our kids, the two things that our kids want. Do you guys remember what they are? They want things to go well, and they want to do things their way. And until they learn boundaries, they can't usually have those things. When they've started to learn boundaries, then they can get to do the things the way they've learned how to do them, and things might go well, but first they have to learn boundaries. So when you are the person who's putting these boundaries in place, they are going to be angry. That's the deal. That's the gig. We all signed up for it because we're all sitting here in this room. Surprise! Nobody told you that, but that's the gig. So they're going to get angry, and then that gives you a chance to respect how what it gives you is the perfect opportunity to teach them how to deal with their anger in a healthy way. I understand you're frustrated. It's hard when the expectations change, but this is what we're going to do, right? I can't tell you how many moms I talk to, and they are going around the home picking up laundry out of every nook and cranny for their 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17-year-old. They have to learn how to do their own stuff. I talked to an adult woman on the backside of this whose mom had a lot of boundary issues, and it was a codependent, unhealthy relationship. And then the mom decided she was going to get healthy, and this woman that I was talking to was in her teens when all this happened. And so the mom set up boundaries and said, I'm not going to do these things for you anymore that you can do for yourself. And so this woman, when she was a teenager, walked around in dirty clothes she did not wash for a month because mom had said, you are doing your own laundry now and I'm not getting sucked back into this. And so she would wear dirty clothes for a month. And it was finally when a friend said to her, what is going on, that she finally was motivated enough to do her own laundry. This is just a really simple thing, but it's one that, that your kids, especially, I don't know, I'm at our house, 12 years old means congratulations, happy birthday, your laundry just became your problem. And no, you don't get paid for it. It just is what it is. The thing that then this allows us to do, when we are putting our boundaries in place, in some ways it sounds like we are being less loving, but the truth of the matter is putting healthy boundaries in place allows us to be more loving, because life happens, and life, especially with kids, happens, and stuff is going to come up that you are going to have no choice to deal with. Anybody have kids in school? The school is outstanding at not giving a rip about your boundaries. It's like their second job after getting our kids through school. You're going to have to deal with that. We had a situation a couple weeks ago where kiddo had a choir concert, and the concert was on Thursday night, and on Tuesday they brought home their dresses that she was supposed to wear. Tuesday after school, she brings her dress home. It needs to be hemmed this much. By the way, you can't cut it, and it needs to be ready by Thursday at 4:30. This isn't her fault. And other than thinking about calling the teacher and saying, I don't know if you know this, but I'm working on boundaries. So what I'm going to be doing is not hemming this dress. I mean, that was my only choice, really, except for that it wasn't my kid's fault. And I don't even know if it was the teacher's fault, because I don't know how all those things came into place. Stuff happens when you have children. You're going to have to deal with it. If I were also responsible for going around and picking up everybody's laundry and picking up all the dog poop out in the backyard and making sure that the hair was swept up off the floor, I would lose my mind. I have space for the choir dress because everybody else is pitching in and has responsibilities for all those other things. So boundaries gives you the space to say, wow, this is a bummer, but you know what, honey, we can get this done and mean it and not lose my mind. Does that make sense on how boundaries actually helps us love better? Did you have a comment?
Question, and we can table it for later, but what about allowance? Because you talked about not getting paid for stuff. So what about boundaries and chores versus allowance? And maybe that, I know you're doing a couple other series, and maybe you've already done one, but I do question.
Yeah, so the question is about boundaries, allowance, what gets paid. I can tell you how I do it, but I would be kind of interested in hearing what other people are doing as well, if anybody wants to. Yeah, Jeremy?
So I'm actually pretty proud of myself for this one.
Okay, get ready, everybody.
So I set up basically a chore chart for each kid, and it's a spreadsheet, and it's every job that can be done, the frequency of which it can be done, and what we will pay every time that it's done.
Okay?
So that once a week, or whenever they do a job, they complete it, and then they're supposed to get one of us to sign off on it. We put the date in the box, and then once a week we total it all up and we pay them basically a commission essentially for everything they did. So
Cool. So the comment was there's opportunities, which jobs they can do, when they can be done, who does it, parents sign off, and then you get paid for those things. For you guys, are there things that they have to do that they are expected to do that are not tied to money?
Yeah, some things. I mean, there are some things that we'll say you need to do X or whatever.
Sure.
We're not going to pay you, but yeah, but a lot of it is that's their choice. And if
Yep.
they choose not to do it, that's their again.
Like
Yep.
setting the table or something, we don't pay them for that.
Right.
It's kind of like
Take
those
out the
basic
trash.
Yep.
things.
Yep, so the comment was like setting the table, that's not a paid job. We're gonna eat and we're gonna use a plate, so take your plate to the table, duh. Yeah. Yes, Carrie?
Have tried this. We're really horrible. We flop back and forth all the time between this is your responsibility to be a part of our family
Yeah.
versus like, but then at the same time I want this thing done and I want them to get a reward for it. So anyway, we're cool. I'd love to hear from everybody. But we tried saying that, out of the money that you receive, we'll just give you money, but we expect these things to be done.
Yep.
Your responsibility. Out of that money, if you can't do what you need to clean your room this week, then you can, out of your money, pay somebody in the family to do it. You can pay me to do it. You can
Okay.
pay somebody else to do it. Normally, it would fall on sister. Okay? So I'm like, well, you can pay
Sure.
sister to do it.
And sister, being smart, it's like, heck yes, I'll clean your room.
Sister
Oh,
says, but I'll just do it for free.
oh, bless her heart. Oh, yeah.
So it backfires.
She needs boundaries.
Yeah,
If sister's
Yeah.
doing it for free, she needs boundaries.
yeah.
She's like, I'll just do it for it. And so we just really struggled, because we thought it was really great, but
Yeah,
We'll
yeah.
run into that too with the chart, which she made, which is really good. Like our daughter loves it because she can see how she's earning money. But then our son's more like, it's not really worth it. I'm
Yeah.
not gonna do that. But then I'm like, well, and so he's doing like actually probably less things, and she's doing more. So again, it's
Yeah.
just probably just.
Well, and also,
But
she's 13.
Yeah.
She understands the value of money more than he does yet. And then my next question to you would be, when he needs money, do you give it to him?
Well, he's actually been a saver. So I mean, any
Okay.
Christmas, birthday, he's stored up a few $100.
Oh, for the love.
Yeah, so
Work with me, kid.
So
Yeah,
if he's a saver and he has gifts and he saves the money and he doesn't need the money anyway for the chores, then you're like, well, I'm not going to give you $5. All right, I got $300 in the bank. What do I care about $5?
here's the discussion we have is like, I want him to blow his money to learn the lesson now.
and this is freaking out the smart money woman. She can't even take it.
Exactly. But it's like, I was reading in Parenting 11 I think, and it talks
Yeah.
about it's better that they learn the lessons like that now than when they're 25 or 30. So if he blows his money, he's 9.
Yeah, but I would guarantee you that at 13, he will go through his money real quick. Somewhere between 13, 15, 16, it's not going to be a problem.
Through it at 9 and then be like, where's my money? Then
Yeah,
You also don't always have to learn your lessons the hard way. Oftentimes you do. We don't always have to
I
learn.
did, but apparently Ben
You do, yeah. There's just different competing, not necessarily competing, just different values and different things you're trying to learn with this, right? Some people give a blanket allowance, and then there's chores that are expected, and the things aren't necessarily attached. Some people attach chores to different dollar amounts and do different ways of balancing the books that way, so to speak. I don't think there's a right or wrong answer in this. I think the important thing is to be consistent with it. Okay? If you say this is the way it's going to be, and you're not going to have any money if you don't do any chores, but then you kind of fold, you're like, well, you really want to go to this, and I don't want you to feel deprived, and then you give them the money anyway, then you're cutting your own knees out from under you. As you think about what your kid needs, it's not whether or not they need chores or whether or not they need money. It's what they really need is the value of money. They need to know the value of work. They need to have these values. So you can teach your kids the value of work without attaching chores to money. You can teach your kids the value of money without attaching chores to money. You can do that through that means, but it isn't. There's not a right or wrong answer. It's just about figuring what works best with your kids. Mm-hmm. Do your kids have to learn the hard way because of their personality? Are the kids that live so in fear of the consequences that just looking at them the wrong way puts them straight? Mm-hmm. It's just different kids are different.
And I will say this too. My first two wanted to go out, wanted to make as much money as they could, want to save as much money. My third and fourth remains to be seen. My third I was worried about. I was really worried about. She turned 14, and the day after she turned 14, she's like, where can I get a job? And so she took all of that upon herself to go out and get a job, to make her own money. And so I was really surprised. I did not think that she was internalizing the value of work and the value of saving. Just because I didn't see it in her, she still was. So, yeah. Sometimes they pleasantly surprise you. Isn't that awesome? All right. Yes?
There's a couple apps out there right now. I use one that's called iAllowance, and so you can set that however you want. But and there's another one called Busy Kid app, and there's some paid ones and some free ones.
Sure.
But we can count their allowance, and you can mark out all the chores. You can have a printout. So you said you made your spreadsheet on it. It's there's a lot of them that's done for you too. So and you can put whether you're rewarded by money if it's a paid chore or not, or if you have younger kids, you can do it for awarded by time or an actual award.
Okay.
So, it was iAllowance is one that I used.
I-allowance, like lowercase I?
Yes.
I-allowance, okay.
And lowercase I. And so you write about the chores, and the cool part about it is that it can also show how they want to spend it. So you want to get the financial things if you want to have to do 10% for tithing and
Sure.
savings and spending money. They have all these, it is all set up for you. It's super easy.
Cool. Thank you for that. Yeah. All right. So then I'm just going to spend a couple of minutes on co-parenting, and particularly in terms of blended families and your kids' other parents. And so here's the deal. You have emotional issues with your child's other parent. If you're married to them, you do. If you're not married to them anymore, you also do. And the reason you have emotional issues with your child's other parent, especially if you're not married to them anymore, is because you're not married to them anymore, but at one time you liked them well enough to have a baby with them. Okay? Just right? So there are emotional entanglements involved with you and your child's other parent. If you have stuff that you need to do, if you need to forgive them, forgive them. If you need to remind yourself every 5 minutes to forgive them, then do that. I'm not going to teach a mini course on forgiveness, but I am going to tell you that it is single-handedly the most important thing that you can do for your child in that relationship.
Yourself.
And yourself. Yep, absolutely. I talk to parents all the time, and they're in blended families, and they'll say, I would do anything for my child. And I really believe them, except the problem is the one thing they haven't quite gotten willing to do is to assume that their child's other parent is actually doing the best they can. You have to be willing to do that for your kid, to assume that the other parent is actually doing the best they can. So deal with the stuff, forgive them, do what you have to do, and move forward with that. So if you're navigating two different homes and two different sets of rules, boundaries are so important for you personally, because what you really have to understand, and you have to live it every day, is that the only household that you have influence over is the one that is also your household. You have no influence over what is going on in the other home. So You've forgiven. You're assuming that the other parent is doing the best that they can. And then, if you need to have a conversation, you are going to pick the one or two things that are absolutely the most important. Absolutely the most important is whether or not the child has, two of the same pillow. Why should you have to buy the same pillow? You should just buy the same pillow. Just do it. But maybe the most important thing is bedtime. Or maybe the most important thing is making sure that homework's getting done. And you're going to talk about those things, again, with forgiveness in your heart, assuming that they are doing the best that they can. And then you are going to learn empathy like it is your actual job. Because the truth of the matter is, if your kid is going back and forth, or your kids are going back and forth, this is single-handedly the hardest thing that they do. And I will give you and myself the benefit of the doubt that not being married to their parent was previously the best thing that you could do for your kids to be happy. The next thing that you need to do for your kids is understand how hard this is for them. And even if this is the healthiest situation, and it probably is, it's still super hard for your kids. So you need to decide what are the absolute non-negotiables, truly. Like, fundamentally, what are the absolute non-negotiables? That kiddo gets to bed on time, that kiddo whatever, and then set those as your starting point. And then when those are successful and those things are going well, then you can build to the next step as you need to. But do what you can to talk to the other parent and try to get on the same page. That would absolutely be the best thing to do. And also keeping in mind, as they get older, as your kids get older and their needs change and their circumstances change, before you make a rule for your kiddo, you want to talk to their other parent. The example that I'm thinking of is dating and driving rules. When Cameron came home and the first time she wanted to go on a date with a boy, like a real date with a real boy, and I'm like, well, I think, my husband and Brian and I, we talked about it, we're like, and I said, you know what, I really need to touch base with her dad, and I need to make sure that we're all on the same page with this. And just the simple fact of doing that honors him in that relationship, even though she's not there that much, but it honors him and gives him a voice in as the role as her dad. So just kind of be aware of those things as kids get a little bit older, and you want to treat each other with mutual respect. You want to assume that they are doing the best that they can in everything that they do. This was at senior night a couple weeks ago, and here's the really cool thing about this. So we both, my husband and I, and then her dad and his wife, went down on the field, and they, kind of say your names, you walk on or whatever. But her dad and his wife have two little girls, and they weren't sure, so Carrie is her stepmom, and they weren't sure if Carrie was going to be able to walk on the field because these little girls are 3 and 4, and what are they going to do with the little girls? And so I didn't even think about it. I said, well, Ava, our second one, Ava will hang out with them while they go on the field. And so what you can't see is behind that Ava is standing with their 2 little girls, and they're all waving their arms off while they call Cameron forward. And again, it's just this, we can do things like that because we assume that everybody's doing the best they can, and because boundaries are put up in a way that's healthy, so we can actually be more loving to one another because we know where we end and where the next one begins. So thoughts, comments, questions about co-parenting or sharing homes, any of that? All right, cool.
And we're going to talk about that more in the future as well,
Yep.
If that's your issue. Also understanding not everybody's in that space. So part of what we want to talk about tonight is just the boundaries on the periphery. There's people that might be your co-parent that are in your life. They're going to be in your life whether you like it or not. And you have to figure out how to set good boundaries with them. And it might be your kid's teacher. It might be your neighbor. It might be somebody else. There's people that are not necessarily in your immediate family, but they're a part of your life. And one of those, some of those people are your parents, right? The family where you grew up. And so I did this nice drawing that hopefully will help you understand this. Everybody has that thing that you talk about, the way that you were raised, and you're like, whatever that thing is, you say, I'm not doing it that way. No, Dad did not know what he was doing, and I'm not doing it the way that my dad did. I'm never saying that to my kid. I'm never, ever doing that, right? So what you do, I'm never behaving that way. I'm not doing it that way. You run headlong outside of the home where you were raised. And you don't know where you're going. You have no idea. You have no map. You've never been out of the home. And here you are, you're lost in the woods, right? So what we end up doing is we end up losing our way and then running right back in the back door. We've all had that experience where you end up saying the thing that you said you'd never say, or doing the thing that you'd never do. You end up just repeating the same patterns that you did or that you experienced with your parents. The same things they did, you do. Right? We do that in certain ways. We don't like being lost in the woods, right? When you run headlong out of the home where you grew up, you get lost in the woods and it's not comfortable. So that's why we run back to where we were. You think of Bear Grylls, right? Nobody looks as good in the woods with mud all over his face and drinking his own urine as Bear Grylls does, right? I can't make it look that good. So what we do is we run back to where we're from. The other options, we run out and then we just sit. We get lost in the woods and we just stay there, right? There's two different ways to think about this. So you think about the dynamics of the home where you grew up. You either fuse, these are technical terms, fusion, or the other one is opposition, where you do, it's like two sides of the same coin. So you end up repeating the exact same patterns in your own way that you grew up with, or you do the flip opposite. You run so far away from your home that everything in your life is defined by your home, because everything you do is intentionally just not what you grew up with, right? You do so much of the opposite. My parents were so legalistic, I'm gonna live on a commune, and you know, my father was like a drill sergeant, so I'm gonna become a hippie. You know, you go opposite, night and day difference. All right, so I want to. This is all from the book Beyond Boundaries. So I'm not getting a kickback, but you know, if Cloud and Townsend see this video, hopefully, you know, they'll do something, at least refund me for all these books I'm selling. But we talked about boundaries with kids. Boundaries, the original book, looks like this. And there's another one that's called Beyond Boundaries. So the stuff I'm talking about here and the slides is taken directly from one of the chapters here. So Beyond Boundaries talks about how to reconcile and takes the basic concepts a little bit deeper. So for the next few slides, what we're going to talk about is some specific dynamics that maybe you grew up with. And I want you to think about your own family and see if this applies to you, okay? So, dynamics. Your parents were nice people, but they discouraged honesty, confrontation, and anger. So the fusion, the way of running right back in the back door, is to avoid confrontation. You often seem to find yourself angry or controlling of people. Opposition, staying lost in the woods, you become angry too quickly and are overly confrontational with others. Dynamic. Your family is somewhat rigid and black and white in the values and basic rules. Is that what you grew up with? Fusion. You have difficulty with the unknown, with complexity, with loose ends, and you have a hard time solving difficult problems. Opposition. Maybe you're so driven to explore every option that you have a hard time making commitments to get things done. And maybe one of these things names you, and then, or maybe that thing in the dynamic column names you the family you grew up in. You know, this is about, again, taking a look in the mirror. The dynamic you grew up with might be you experienced good structure and care in your family, but your family didn't talk about relational issues. So fusion, a way to run in the back door, would be to live in the world of the mind. And maybe you're uncomfortable with talking about emotional things, and you just rationalize everything away. Opposition, maybe you're so emotional that feelings sometimes get you in trouble. Maybe the dynamic you grew up with is you had a parent that was loving but sometimes irresponsible or unreliable. You have difficulty then taking responsibility for your life. And maybe you give control over others. Or, flip side of a coin, maybe you had to grow up quickly. So since your parent was not responsible at all, you became the responsible one in the family. And because of that, you're over-responsible and you're guilt-ridden. Maybe your home was chaotic growing up. So you find yourself unable to meet goals, finish projects, and have structure in your life. Or maybe you went the other way, you became rigid. You grew up with the hippies, and then you went and became the drill sergeant. Dynamic. Maybe you had an immature parent. You feel sometimes you act like a kid around other adults. Opposition. Maybe instead of that, you became what psychologists call the parentified child. There should be another quote around parentified. You learn to parent your parents by taking care of the emotional needs of your parent, by not being a bother to your parent, by always making them proud. This is something that you see a lot in the households of alcoholics or addicts, where one of the children ends up becoming the parent, so to speak. Maybe you had perfectionistic parents. You developed a false and ideal presentation of who you are to avoid judgment and shame. You live into that perfection and you take that on yourself and you become a perfectionist. Or maybe you throw your values and your standards out to the wind and you give up trying to be a good person, knowing you'll never be good enough. Dynamic. What was the unhealthy dynamic in your home? So take a minute and think about it. What is the dynamic growing up with you? Now, in my late 20s, if you asked me, I would say I had as good a childhood growing up as anybody could expect. We were middle class, we weren't poor, we weren't rich. You know, my parents were around, my parents weren't divorced. It was about as good a raising as you could expect. And a friend of the family said, "You know your dad's an alcoholic, right?" And I said, "No." How dare you? And for me, it was a thing where my dad's a high-functioning alcoholic, and I didn't realize what a high-functioning alcoholic was. So for me, understanding those dynamics growing up, it helped me understand in a new way the ways that I was repeating some of the patterns from my parents. And in some ways, I was living in opposition to that. I was the over-functioning one. I was the one that took responsibility. I was the one that took care of everything. And then the way that I lived out that next part of our lives, where I was the one that organized the interventions for my dad. I was the one that did part of my dad's job to make sure that he could get sober. I was the one that did all the things to make sure everything was happening the way it was supposed to. My over-functioning was just as unhealthy as my dad's under-functioning because it was that opposition thing. My life was like a mirror's image of what my dad's life was. I was running headlong away from my family's home, and that ended up defining my life just as much as it would be if I just stayed there. So understanding what are the ways that the dynamics in your home define you is a boundaries question. Okay, there are things in the Bible that are kind of confusing when you first read them, where in the Ten Commandments, God talks about children being punished to the third and fourth generations for the sins of the parents. And that sounds cruel and unusual. And if you read Ezekiel 18, they ask that question. It's like, if parents eat sour grapes, then why is it that the kids' teeth are on edge? Why do the kids make a bitter face when the parents are the ones eating the bitter food? It's kind of a proverb of that day. And God responds like, "No, you're misusing this. I'm not saying that I'm cruel, that I'm. Everybody pays for their own sins. Everybody is held responsible for their own actions. What God is saying is that in that, what we do, our lack of boundaries, really affects the way that our kids behave. So one of the ways that in Beyond Boundaries he talks about this, if you go and connect the dots of how you were raised and the boundary issues that your parents have. My mom as a codependent person, my dad as an alcoholic, my grandparents, my great-grandparents, the further you go back, the more it will make sense. And when you understand the dynamics and see the way that depression goes through generation to generation, or see the way that perfectionism goes through generation to generation, then you can understand why you make some of the decisions you make. And so there is a third option, right? Instead of getting lost in the woods, instead of running right back in the home where you grew up, it's about finding a map, right? Finding a way that you can live a different way. And that's why you're here. That's why we read books about boundaries. That's why I want to encourage you to buy one of these books. That's why I want to encourage you to see a therapist. That's why I want to encourage you to think about what are the dynamics that I grew up with, not so that I dwell on the past and I, focus on things that aren't really under my control, but you go back in order to go forward, to understand what are the ways that I can grow past where I live at this point in my life. And this is a really important step because as Amanda was talking about being owned by our emotions, we're owned by our past too. When we have bad boundaries, our emotions take the driver's seat. When we have bad boundaries, our past take the driver's seat. When we have bad boundaries, our histories, the stories that we were told growing up get to drive in our life. When we have good boundaries, God gets to tell us who we are. When we have good boundaries, we get to write the end of our story. So no matter what you came from, if you read and own the story of where you came from, you get to write the end of it. But the only way to do that is by looking back and understanding how to go forward. I'm going to go through real quick. There's two kinds of boundaries. There's defining boundaries. There's boundaries that are timeless values that tell you who you are and who you're not. Right? And we've been talking about this. These are things like the rules that you put on your house. Like, in this house, we love God. In this house, we clean our plate. In this house, we do these things because this is who we are. So, this is the first kind. So, I follow God. These are examples of this. I follow God in His ways, and I always live my life in Him. I love my family and my friends, and I will treat them with grace and truth. I will always be growing and will not get off the path. I say and receive the truth. I am neither silent in saying it nor defensive in receiving it. These are good defining boundaries. Okay? The second type of boundary is protective boundaries. Now, the defining boundaries are things that are values that are universal to you. They're things that always apply in your life. They're things that define you and that stay with you long term. Protective boundaries are boundaries you set up with people that don't respect your boundaries. Right? This is your ability to adapt to the poor boundaries of others. Okay? So, protective boundary, an example of this. If you continue being 30 minutes late, I'm just going to take a different car. That's a good protective boundary you can set. If you keep spending over our budget, I will cut up the credit cards. Now, I don't know how that relates to your parenting. I hope you're not giving your elementary kids credit cards, but we probably have a different kind of conversation we'd be having. I won't help you with your homework unless you're working as hard as I am. Do you work harder on your kids' homework than they do? That's a boundary issue. If your friend Bobby doesn't respect our things, then he can't come to our house. Right? These are protective boundaries. So as we think through what these boundaries are like, you think through a protective boundary, those are ones you need to set, and those things you can adjust over time. If Bobby changes behavior, then Bobby could come over. Right? And then you think through what a defining boundary is. These are the things that are your non-negotiables, as we talked about earlier. These are things that you need to set in stone and literally write them on your wall. Right? I showed last week a picture from our house, the Mason family rules, right? Love God, love yourself, love your neighbor, and laugh a lot. Those are things that we do at the Mason house. There's certain things, like we go to church every Sunday. You know, if you're going to live in this house, this is what we're going to do. This is who we are. There's certain, you take a bath, you wash your laundry. You don't go a month without washing your clothes. Different things that are defining attributes of what it means to live in your household. And above all, as we close on this boundary session, knowing that God is the one that guides you in that, that decides for you. You are mine, he says. I called you by name and you are mine. I bought you with a price. You are mine. Even though you walk through water, you will not drown. Even though you go through fire, you will not be burned. Because I'm with you. And I want you to hear God saying that to you. So that as you go through whatever trials you're going through as a parent or as a person, that the boundaries that God has for you tell you that you're valuable. In God's eyes, you are worthwhile. And that there's nothing in life that will ever take his love from you. That's a boundary. This is sacred. God's love for you is something that will never be taken. And so as you think about that, respect yourself enough to set good boundaries. Let me pray for you. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the ways that you love us so much, that you set boundaries. Heavenly Father, let us look to you and learn from you what boundaries look like. As this journey has begun for these folks, maybe for the first time, or as they revisit some things they learned previously, Lord, I pray that they would continue this journey. They would continue to think about what it looks like to have healthy boundaries. They would continue to think about the ways that you have called them to be more and do more, to live a life that's more guided by values than emotions or history, that live a life that's guided by your gospel. Lord, for freedom you have set us free. Let us see the freedom that you have for us in these things. Let us live by these things in a way that gives us strength and character, that lets us be the city standing on a hill that cannot be hidden. Let us let our light shine so that everyone would see the good things you're doing in our lives, and that they would glorify you, knowing that you are the source of every good thing. And part of that is our boundaries. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
All right, thanks for being here.
Thanks, everybody.
See you next week. We're going to be talking about behavior stuff.
Woohoo!
So I encourage you to that. Let us know if there's things we can do as we close boundaries. It doesn't mean Parenting on Purpose is over. You can still come next week. We also want to let you know we have a marriage retreat coming up on November 2nd and 3rd. We'd love to have you come to that. If you're married, if you're not married, don't come because that'll be awkward. Unless if you have a fiance or somebody you're living with, we're not going to check your marriage license at the door. So I don't want to keep you from working on your relationship because you haven't said I do yet. So please come to the marriage retreat. Let me know if you have questions, but have a good night.